On the 4th of July, 2026, on the most famous tennis court on Earth, a forehand floats long, and 8,000 kilometers away, an entire country loses its mind at the exact same second. The scoreboard on center court reads 7-6, 6-2. The defending Wimbledon champion, the world number 3, one of the most dominant players of her generation, has just been knocked out of her own tournament. And the 21-year-old standing on the other side of the net, hands over her face, trying not to cry in front of 15,000 people, comes from a country that doesn't have a single grass court. But here's the detail that makes this story almost impossible to believe. 3 years before this moment, at a graduation ceremony in Spain, a special guest was invited to hand a teenage student her diploma. That guest was Iga Swiatek. The student was Alex Eala. The champion literally handed this girl her diploma, and then, on the biggest stage in tennis, that same girl took her crown. Nobody writes scripts like that. Real life just did. And to understand how a kid from Quezon City ended up rewriting 70 years of history in a single afternoon, and why millions of people who had never watched a tennis match in their lives suddenly couldn't look away, you have to go back to where none of this was supposed to be possible. Start with this image, because everything that follows grows out of it. A young girl in the Philippines, racket in hand, practicing her serve and having to angle it around a basketball hoop hanging over her head. That's not a metaphor. Alex Eala learned tennis on a court painted over with basketball lines in a country where basketball is practically a religion. More basketballs bounce on Filipino neighborhood courts in a single day than tennis balls do in a month. Tennis wasn't just unpopular where she grew up, it was almost invisible. Every day after school, she would head to the court with her older brother and her grandfather. No academy, no entourage, no professional setup, just a family, a shared obsession, and a little girl in ruffled socks hitting ball after ball after ball. Years later, standing on center court after the biggest win of her life, she would bring up those ruffled socks herself, because that's the version of her that nobody saw. The version that did all the work before a single camera ever pointed her way. And here's the part that makes her eventual destination almost absurd. The Philippines, to her knowledge, didn't have a single grass court, not one. The surface that Wimbledon is played on, the surface she would one day make history on, simply did not exist in her world. She has said that as a kid, certain things about Wimbledon stuck with her anyway. The all-white dress code, the greenery, the sense that this place was different from everywhere else. It became the tournament she held closest to her heart, precisely because it was the one furthest from her reality. A basketball country, a sport nobody played, a surface that didn't exist. If you were designing the least likely origin story for a Wimbledon giant killer, you would design this one. And yet, somewhere in that gap between what was and what could be, a decision was forming, one that would ask a 13-year-old to give up almost everything. Think about what you were doing at 13. Now imagine boarding a plane, leaving your parents, your friends, your language, your entire life behind, and moving to an island in Spain to chase a dream your country had never produced. That's what Alex Eala did when she joined the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, one of the most demanding tennis environments on the planet, built around the philosophy of one of the most relentless competitors the sport has ever seen. It's easy to say that sentence quickly. It's harder to sit with what it actually meant. Birthdays on video calls, homesickness that doesn't go away just because your forehand is improving, training sessions where you're surrounded by talented kids from tennis nations, countries with systems, pipelines, and histories, while you carry a flag that has never had a player go where you're trying to go. There was no roadmap. She was the roadmap. And slowly, quietly, it started working. She climbed through the junior ranks. She got her first real taste of grass in 2018 on the junior circuit. Barely 2 weeks a year on the surface, a crash course in a completely foreign game. Then, in 2022, came the first genuine signal that this wasn't just a nice story. Alex Eala won the U.S. Open girls singles title, a junior Grand Slam champion from the Philippines. The tennis world noticed for about a weekend, then moved on the way it always does with junior results. In 2023, she graduated from the academy, and for the ceremony, the school arranged something special. A world-class champion would hand the graduates their diplomas. That champion was Iga Swiatek, at the time, the best player on the planet. There's a photo of that moment, a legend and a hopeful, side by side, one career at its peak, the other not yet started. Nobody in that room could have guessed that the next time these two shared a truly historic moment, the roles would be flipped, and the entire tennis world would be watching it happen live. But before center court, there had to be a warning shot, and it came in Miami. March 2025. Alex Eala enters the Miami Open as a wild card, a player ranked far outside the elite, given a spot in the draw essentially as a courtesy. Wild cards are supposed to win a round if they're lucky, wave to the crowd, and go home. Nobody tells the tournament story around them. Except this particular wild card didn't read that script. Over one unforgettable week, Eala tore through the draw and did something no one saw coming. Back-to-back wins over top 10 players, including world number 5 Madison Keys and world number 2 Iga Swiatek. Yes, Swiatek. The Wimbledon shock of 2026 wasn't even the first time Eala had beaten her. Miami was the original crime scene. By the time the run ended in the semifinals, Eala had become the first player from the Philippines ever to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal and the first ever to crack the world's top 100. Two barriers that had stood for the entire history of Philippine tennis, gone in a single tournament. The rest of 2025 kept building the foundation. A first career tour-level final at Eastbourne, a first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara, her first Grand Slam main draw win as a professional at the U.S. Open. She finished the year ranked number 50 in the world, a number that would have sounded like science fiction to the girls serving around basketball hoops. And yet, here's the strange thing about breakthroughs. The world has a short memory. By early 2026, plenty of people had quietly filed Miami away as a hot streak, a lightning-in-a-bottle week that couldn't be repeated on a stage that truly mattered. In Grand Slams, her record told a brutal story. Before the summer of 2026, she had won just one main draw match at the majors against 5 defeats. 1 and 5. Critics had their evidence. The biggest stages, they said, were still too big. What almost nobody was tracking was what happened in the months right before Wimbledon, a stretch of results that, in hindsight, was practically a flashing red light warning that everyone ignored. The first half of 2026 was a roller coaster that perfectly explains why so few people saw Wimbledon coming. In January, Eala made a semi-final run in Auckland and pushed her ranking to a new career high. In February, she reached quarterfinals in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and in Dubai, buried in the middle of that run, was a result that would age incredibly well, a win over top 10 star Jasmine Paolini. Remember that name. It's coming back in the most painful way possible. Then came the clay season, and with it, the doubts. An early exit in Linz, a loss in Stuttgart, out in the round of 64 in Madrid, a first-round defeat at the French Open. Match after match on the slow red dirt, the momentum drained away, and the narrative wrote itself. Promising player, clear ceiling. If you only glanced at her results in April and May, you'd have assumed her season was quietly falling apart. Then, the tour moved to grass, and something flipped like a switch. In early June, Eala won the Birmingham Open title. Weeks later, in Berlin, she carved through the draw to reach the semifinals, taking down 2 top 10 players along the way, including former Wimbledon champion Elena Rybakina and world number 8 Elina Svitolina. By the time Wimbledon arrived, her grass court record for the season was a staggering 12 wins against just 4 losses. The player from the country with no grass courts had somehow become one of the most dangerous grass court players in the world. The seeding committee noticed, even if the public didn't. Eala entered Wimbledon 2026 as the 29th seed, the first Filipina ever to be seeded at any Grand Slam in history. Another first, collected almost quietly while everyone's attention was fixed on the usual suspects at the top of the draw. Picture the setup. A player in the form of her life, on her best surface, at the tournament she'd loved since childhood, carrying a chip on her shoulder from every early slam exit, and almost nobody outside the Philippines paying attention. Every ingredient was in place. All that was missing was the match that would light the fuse. And the draw, with a cruelty that turned out to be a gift, delivered exactly that. A date on center court with the defending champion herself. Third round, center court, Alex Eala versus Iga Swiatek, the defending champion, the world number 3, a player with a shelf full of Grand Slam trophies. On paper, this was where the fairy tale was supposed to end politely. What happened instead was 84 minutes of some of the most gripping tennis of the entire tournament, and that was just the first set. It started badly. Swiatek struck first, ripping a forehand pass right on the line to break serve early, a champion doing champion things. But Eala broke straight back, and the way she did it told you everything about her tennis brain. She threw up a high, looping moonball return, completely disrupting Swiatek's rhythm, then finished the point with an angled pass. Not power, craft. Then her returning caught fire, and suddenly she'd broken again and was serving at 5-3 with a set point against the defending champion. And this is where most underdogs blink. Swiatek reeled off 3 consecutive forehand winners, pure champion's defiance, and dragged the set back to 5-5. The moment everyone expected had arrived, the favorite reasserting control, the dream deflating on schedule. The set went to a tiebreak. Eala surged to 5-2. Swiatek stormed back with 4 straight points to reach set point, then a second set point. 2 chances for the champion to snatch the set, and with it, almost certainly, the match. Eala saved the first with an unreturnable serve. She saved the second when Swiatek pushed a forehand into the net, and on her own 4th set point, a Swiatek forehand flew long. 11-9, Eala. Asked afterward how she survived those moments, her answer was disarmingly simple. 1 point at a time, because the moment you start counting the score, you start to crumble. See the ball, go for it. Instinct over fear. If the first set was a war, the second was a statement. Eala pressed forward relentlessly, brilliant defense to force errors, back-to-back aces, 2 ridiculous passing shots, and ran away with it 6-2. When the final ball landed long, the first Filipina ever to reach a Grand Slam third round had just become the first ever to reach the second week of a major. Then came the interview that broke the internet back home. Fighting tears, Eala admitted that for someone like Iga or Serena or Venus, this result might seem small, but for someone who grew up in the Philippines, training with her brother and grandfather every day after school, it was everything. And then she dedicated the win to the Filipino fans, to her family, and to all the little girls with ruffled socks and chubby cheeks. The crowd melted, the clip went everywhere, and a tennis match officially stopped being a tennis match. Because what happened over the next 48 hours in the Philippines wasn't a sports reaction, it was something the country hadn't felt in years. To understand the scale of what came next, you need one name: Manny Pacquiao. For years, when Pacquiao fought on a Sunday morning, the Philippines famously went still. Streets emptied, the entire nation glued to a single event. That's the comparison Filipino fans and international media reached for as Eala's run caught fire, with ESPN noting that the anticipation once reserved for Pacquiao's fights had found a new home in her matches. Millions were now tuning in, many of them watching in the middle of the night, many of them watching tennis seriously for the very first time in their lives. The Philippine Sports Commission organized a public watch party at the Phil Sports Arena in Pasig City, handing out flags to a crowd that erupted after every single point. One superfan, known as Kuya Barong, famous for showing up to Filipino sporting events in a traditional barong and salakat, waving the flag, admitted openly that he was still learning the rules of tennis and how the scoring even worked. It didn't matter. As he put it, she unifies Filipinos. People weren't watching because they loved tennis, they were watching because they loved what she was proving. The reaction reached the very top. President Marcos posted a public message declaring that the world had only begun to see what Filipinos are capable of, and thanking Eala for proving that no dream is beyond the reach of a Filipino who dares to dream and works for it. Tennis royalty joined in too. Billie Jean King took notice of the Swiatek upset, and Maria Sharapova, the very player a young Eala once called her super idol, publicly called her a star. Sit with that for a second. Your childhood hero watching you make history and telling the world you're the real thing.
And then there was the quietest, most important ripple of all. Across the Philippines, kids who'd never held a racket started asking their parents for one. Coaches reported interest they'd never seen before. In a basketball nation, families began looking at tennis, a sport that had lived on the margins for generations, and seeing for the first time a realistic path. None of that trends the way a highlight does, but it might outlast every highlight from the entire tournament. There was just one problem with all this euphoria. The tournament wasn't over, and waiting in the fourth round was a player Eala knew very well, one with her own history, her own motivation, and a very recent score to settle. Jasmine Paolini, world number 17, Wimbledon finalist in 2024, and here's where that Dubai detail comes back, a player Eala had beaten just months earlier in February. Paolini arrived on court with a fresh reason to be dangerous, and she just steamrolled her previous opponent, dropping barely a handful of games. This was no reward for beating Swiatek. This was a second boss fight, immediately after the first. The match was tense from the opening exchanges. In the first set, uncharacteristic, unforced errors crept into Eala's game, the kind that come when a nation's expectations land on your shoulders overnight, and Paolini pounced to take it 6-4. And this is exactly the moment where breakthrough stories usually collapse. The adrenaline runs out, the occasion gets too heavy, and the fairy tale ends with a whimper. Instead, Eala regrouped. The second set was composed, aggressive, fearless, everything the moment demanded, and she took it 6-4 to level the match. One set, winner take all for a place in the Wimbledon quarterfinals. The deciding set stayed locked at 3-3, every game a knife fight, until Paolini, the veteran of a Wimbledon final, the player who had lived these moments before, found her absolute best when it mattered most and reeled off the final 3 games. Final score, 4-6, 6-4, 3-6. The run was over. But what happened next is the image worth remembering. As Eala left center court, the crowd rose to its feet, a standing ovation, not for the winner, but for the loser. She paused, took the moment in, and raised her hands to form a heart for the crowd. Wimbledon, the oldest and most tradition-bound tournament in tennis, had adopted a new favorite from Quezon City. And the history books had already been rewritten regardless. First Filipina in the Open era to reach a Grand Slam 4th round. In doing so, she surpassed a benchmark that had stood for more than 70 years. The 3rd round finishes of Philippine legends Felicissimo Ampon, Raimundo Dero, and Cesar Carmona set all the way back in the amateur era. She also left London with roughly 300,000 euros in prize money, around 24 million pesos, for the deepest Grand Slam run her country has ever seen. Even in defeat, she'd redrawn the map. Her own verdict on the loss might be the most revealing part. She didn't dwell on the result, she talked about the fine details, how tight matches come down to 1 or 2 points, and how the only thing a player truly controls is whether they face those moments with bravery, a steady mind, and intensity. Did I stick to my game plan? Did I do everything I could? If yes, no regrets. That's not the language of a lucky streak. That's the language of someone building something much bigger.
Which raises the question everyone's now asking, what exactly happens next? Right now, as you're watching this, Alex Eala is home. After the best Grand Slam campaign of her life, she flew back to the Philippines for a short break, and on July 15th, she's holding a fan meet at the Glorieta Activity Center to personally thank the supporters who lost sleep for her. Picture that scene for a moment. A country that barely followed tennis a year ago, now showing up in droves just to say thank you to a 21-year-old. But the break will be short because the calendar doesn't care about fairy tales. The tour now shifts to hard courts, a completely different surface, a different rhythm, a different set of threats. Her build-up runs through the BC Open in late July and the National Bank Open in Toronto in early August, leading to the biggest hard court stage of all, the US Open. And that's a tournament with real meaning for her. It's where she won the junior title in 2022 and where she claimed her first professional Grand Slam main draw win just last year.
Here's where the numbers get genuinely exciting. Her Wimbledon run lifts her to a brand new career high of world number 28. And because she has very few ranking points to defend for the rest of the year, analysts have pointed out that a strong summer could realistically carry her into the world's top 20 by the end of 2026, with anything special at the US Open potentially launching her even higher, faster. Her career record against top 10 opponents now stands at a remarkable 7 wins and 4 losses. Read that again. Against the very best players on earth, she wins more than she loses. Some respected voices are going much further. Former British number 1 Greg Rusedski, who watched the Swiatek upset live from the commentary box, said on his podcast that in his view, this is somebody who will win Wimbledon one day and could reach the top 5 in the world, adding that during that match, it was Eala, not the 6-time major champion across the net, who looked like the one with all the trophies. That's his prediction, not a guarantee, and tennis history is littered with breakthroughs that never got a sequel. But it tells you how seriously the sport now takes her. And maybe that's the real ending here, or rather, the reason there isn't one. Somewhere in the Philippines right now, a kid is serving a tennis ball around a basketball hoop, the same way Alex once did, except with one enormous difference. That kid now knows exactly where this road can lead. A door that stayed shut for 70 years doesn't just close again quietly. Whatever happens on the hard courts this summer, another historic run or a humbling reset, one thing is already beyond debate. The girl in the ruffled socks didn't just make history at Wimbledon, she made an entire country believe it was only the trailer. The movie hasn't even started. If you enjoyed this story, you know what to do. And trust me, based on how this summer is going, you're gonna want to be here for the next chapter.